On today's episode of Locked On 76ers, as we gear up for the postseason, Philadelphia, they have the league leader in scoring and assists. How does that factor into the postseason? And how big of a deal is that historically? We'll break it all down next, right here, Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. What's up, Keith? What's going on, man?
What's poppin', D? How you doing, bro?
Man, long week since we have the late game in the week on a Saturday afternoon, but we'll get through it all together. So we're all good. Welcome, everybody, to Locked On 76ers. I'm Devon Givens from 97.5 The Fanatic Radio in Philadelphia, alongside my co-host, Keith Pompey, Sixers beat writer from theinquirer.com. Thanks for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On 76ers is free and available on all platforms, including right here on YouTube at Locked On 76ers. All right, Keith, we got to talk about the coaching matchup. Two guys that are facing off that know each other very well, Doc Rivers, Jacques Vaughn. We'll get into those guys in a later segment. We'll also talk about some of the biggest storylines coming from the 22-23 campaign for your 54-win Philadelphia 76ers. But first, we got to talk about the league leaders, man. Joel Embiid leading the NBA at the end of the season in scoring with over 33 points per game. James Harden with 10.7, so we just rounded off to 11 assists on the year in his 50-plus games and Embiid's 60-plus games. We think is going to maybe capture his first Most Valuable Player award this offseason. And Keith, that's not nothing to sneeze at, man. To have two guys that did that for your team, 54 wins, both in conversation. Obviously, Embiid is a lock, but James Harden in conversation, like we've talked about in the past, about those two guys being all NBA performers, top 15 players all season long. Hey, man, that's a good thing to have, number one, historically, as we talk about them, and then later on as we get into those two leading this basketball team into the postseason.
Yeah, that's huge because when you look at it, that hasn't been accomplished in 41 seasons. The last time it happened was when the Spurs Iceman George Gervin, won the scoring title, and Johnny Moore led the league in assists per game, right? So, and it's crazy, but the crazy part about that is, just to add to this context, Embiid becomes the first center to win back-to-back consecutive scoring titles since Hall of Famer Bob McAdoo won 3 straight from the Buffalo Braves from the 1973-74 season to 75-76. So, it's just been phenomenal. And you look at it, Harden has helped him. And he's helped Harden because at one point, Harden's he's averaging 10.7 assists, but 4.8 of those assists per game were going to Embiid. 5 assists a game, half of his assists. So, yeah, that's a major feat, D. That's something that you really can't sneeze at, and it's good, especially for this team.
Well, they've certainly helped out each other. I mean, just think about it, where Embiid is in his prime, and he has been the best player on this team for 6 consecutive years now. He's been the best player. This is his franchise. But he also needed that other, and he did have it with Jimmy Butler. He had it in a sense with Ben Simmons, and to a lesser extent, but an important piece of who he was for this basketball team, he had J.J. Redick too, the way that they were able to play that two-man game off the dribble handoff, really on that left side of the floor where they were dynamic together. But he's never had anyone like this long-term, where Jimmy Butler was here for 70-plus and, of course, the postseason. And that was tremendous. And most people wanted him to stay. And I think that would have been the right move. We know how things played out with that entire decision with Jimmy Butler moving on. But when you look at James Harden, where he used to be this guy that we're talking about with Joel Embiid, he is now going into the twilight years of his career, but still very, very effective as a basketball player where he needs to be accounted for. And he's adjusted his game to help out not only the rest of his teammates, but also to help out this guy again that's going to lead this franchise potentially to, something much bigger than the second round appearances that we've seen. And that's why they've been good for one another. And we know we know that they're both tremendous basketball players, and they've both been able to do so many great things with the individual accolades, but neither of them have gotten where we think, at least they talk about, wanting to be as far as the NBA championship. So to have this 4 full season, to see how it all played out, to see even Sixer fans come around to James Harden, because for a good part of the offseason, yes, they were excited about how and giving him kind of a pass because of what he did with taking the 2-year deal, 1 year, of course, player option in that second year. So he'll probably opt out after this year. Sixer fans were excited about that part, and they gave him a bit of a pass, but they were also looking at it and saying, we don't want this guy long-term on our team. But having him out there, helping to lead this basketball team, putting up the numbers that he did, many argued that he should have been on the All-Star team despite the games that he missed. They've really bought in, to James Harden and what he provides for the basketball team as a whole, but also for Joel Embiid as a player, where he may have needed that type of guy to run along sidekick wise with him for this season and maybe even a few more beyond.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about it is, I'm not comparing this team to the 83 squad that won the championship. I don't think they're good, but that 83 squad, I mean, we're
That's
talking
an all-time team.
Yeah, we're talking about 4 Hall of Famers. We're talking about a Hall of Fame, a coach who was a Hall of Fame player. You know what I mean? So, but here's the thing. Here's a correlation to that team. So you had a former MVP, a former scoring champion, and Dr. J, who came and played with a young up-and-coming or a young player in his prime, an MVP in his prime type. We're talking about Moses Malone. Now, again, they got all of them got different skill sets, but that's it. You got to, and Dr. J was 33 that year too when they won the championship. So, you look at that, and when you look and you see how James, right now, a lot of his stuff is more cerebral. And what I mean by that is he's like, when he's the coach on the floor, he's telling guys where to be, what to do, whatnot. But also he can still make passes with his eyes closed. He knows the game. He has a high IQ. So he's kind of like the leader. Now, Doc was still dunking on people, making house calls, doing whatever. But James' game has changed. But at the same time, when you look at him, a future Hall of Famer as your sidekick, as Robin to your Batman, that's not bad at all. At all.
A lot of playoff experience between the two, a lot of failures between the two in the postseason. They're looking to change that this year. And if the regular season was any indication of how they played, we'll see if it plays out that way once things get underway on Saturday, 1 o'clock, when they host the Brooklyn Nets for game 1 of the first round matchup. You have to wonder a little bit. Now they're going to have this time off, extra rest, the Achilles for Harden, and of course the calf for Joel Embiid. You hope those things don't crop up and become a problem. I want to see everybody get through it healthy and see how this whole playoff run plays out in general. So very curious to see how it goes. On the other side, Keith, we got to talk about some of the standout things that happened for the seasons, the best storylines from the season this year, because there were a lot of interesting ones for this basketball team, leading to their 54 wins and the 3rd seed in the East. And by the way, the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, the best records in the NBA, even in front of Denver in the West. So whoever wins come out of the East, they'll be hosting the NBA championship game 1 on their home floor. Could it be the 76ers? Maybe that'll be something we talk about down the line. We'll come back. We'll get into the best storylines of the campaign for your basketball team next, right here, Locked On 76ers. But as we get ready and gear up for the start of the NBA playoffs, have you ever had problems buying tickets to sporting events or maybe some other events, comedy shows, some concerts maybe in your area? I know that right now where we have some really big shows coming up here in town from Adam Sandler, actually on Friday, before the Sixers play on Saturday. Adam Sandler Friday at the Center. How about that? Dave Chappelle in June. And you have many other concerts that will be taking place at the arena that are always difficult to get them. Or if you try last minute, the prices are just too high. Well, if buying tickets to your favorite events are stressful, don't worry. I got you covered because Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. It shouldn't be stressful, right? With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. All of it. What are some things that you like about the Game Time app? Let me tell you, let me tell you about a few things. Flash deals, last minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets, easy to navigate there on the Game Time app in your area. Images of the seat views, lowest prices guaranteed. Game Time is the place for last minute ticket deals. Forget the months in advance planning all the time. Game Time has the deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, even with baseball. You know how sometimes you're like, oh, let me just wait a minute. Maybe I can gather a few more people. We can find some really good seats. Game Time is the place to go. The Game Time app guarantees means you'll always get the best price if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back, Locked On 76ers. He is Keith Pompey. I'm Devon Givens, and we thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen for your second. Why don't you go check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Keith, 54 wins in the books. James Harden, Joel Embiid, we talked about them in the spectacular season that they had, maybe even an MVP-type season for Joel Embiid. There were a lot of things that happened throughout the year. What are maybe a few storylines that stood out to you for this 22-23 season as a reporter, of course, that just watches it for the job that you have to do? You enjoy basketball, you love it. But as a reporter, you see some things that stand out and say, oh, that was pretty good.
You know what? The one thing that really stood out to me about this team is the relentlessness. Relentless. Couldn't get it out. Relentless. Thanks. I still can't get it out. Oh Lord.
Good.
But it's all good though. Y'all know what I mean. Relentlessness. I got it. I said it. But anyway, so look, here's the deal. This team, when you look at the Sixers bench, the Sixers bench players do not compare to the Milwaukee Bucks. They do not compare to the Boston Celtics. You can argue when Golden State is intact, they don't compare to them, right? Now, the thing is, though, however, is that this team has no quit. And when you look at the 76ers, like collectively, they have had a lot of games where they trailed by 20 or more points and they came back this season to win it. And to me, that's the one thing that stood out the most. And we're talking about quality teams. We're talking about going into Sacramento, being down 21, or going in trailing by 20-something to Memphis. Even a couple of days ago when they played the Atlanta Hawks, and they weren't down by that much, but they played them without their starting lineup and their sixth man, and they still were able to come back and get a win. So to me, that's the one thing. The Sixers' relentlessness is the one thing that really stands out. Now, secondly, I will have to say everybody talks about Joel Embiid. They talk about Maxey. They talk about Tobias's defense. They talk about all this other stuff. But I want to give Paul Reed his flowers. I mean, here's a guy who no one expected that Doc Rivers would keep as the backup center, and he flip-flopped. And then once Doc had confidence in him to stay in there, you saw his game elevate. So to me, that's the storyline that really stood out. In the last game, he was blocking everybody's shot.
5 blocks or something like that?
Yeah, 5 blocks. So those are two storylines that stand out to me.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the team thing. Let's start with where they were with Harden missing his what was that 14 games, and then Maxey missing a little bit more. I think he went about 20 because of his foot injury, and those guys being out. And you had the players step in, specifically when we look at what Shake Milton and DeAnthony Melton were able to do in the backcourt. And B was on the floor for a lot of those, but he missed some time too. Tobias Harris had to miss a couple of games there in the mix because of I think it was the hip at that time. But the way that they were able to stay in there, I think they were 8-6 during the time that he was off, James Harden,
Mm-hmm.
in those 14 games and playing well with Maxey on the bench. So we start there, and then we transition to the 12-12 that we always bring up, because that's a sticking point for me from where they were with all the questions where, we were talking about the San Antonio Spurs, right? Keith, going back and forth, how they beat the Sixers early, losing the teams that they
You still
played
think that was a good win?
at the time. Yeah. At the time, yeah, guess what? They needed it. And then, looking at just some of the other losses that they suffered during that stretch, and looking at it overall, man, to end up 42-16 for the remainder of the year. Top 10 defense in the NBA, top 10 offense in the NBA, that we come on here, and as we should, when we break these games down on a game-by-game basis, the turnovers, the bad defense on the perimeter by letting guards go off, 25 threes by the Dallas Mavericks on the road, where you have Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic combined for, I don't remember what, 14 threes between the two of them, whatever crazy number it was. Reggie Bullock hitting the 5 in the third quarter, even though I think it was like 3 in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the things that we point out. Of course, the negative parts, because how many games? But look, 42-16 since that 12-12 record around December 9th. And here they are at the end of the year, 54 wins, third seed, and they have their issues against Milwaukee, and they have their issues against Boston. Who doesn't? Now it's just about them getting over the hump and figuring it out, potentially in the second and quite possibly in the third round. But that's where I'm going to go. The how they kept themselves together to once they all came back, Keith, and they were all on the floor for the most part of those 58 games after that, those first 24, they have a 42-16 record. And while it is the regular season, that's all we have to go off of to prepare for the playoffs, for the run that we maybe think that they can make once the playoffs get underway. But that's a big deal. 42-16, 54 wins overall. To have that type of record at the end of the year, I thought it was pretty remarkable for them to finish things off the way that they did.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, that is. It is.
I'm not raising a banner. I'm not putting it up, in the center, putting it up in the rafters. I'm just simply talking about what the season was. And most teams had their issues that they had to deal with. But we covered the Sixers. We watched them on a daily basis. So to see we know what they went through. And then when they did come back, they were one of the better teams in the NBA, if not the best record-wise throughout that part of the year. So I just wanted to point that out as a storyline for me that really meant something.
Yeah, I mean, it is. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. But you're right. I mean, you got to give them their flowers for what they were able to accomplish. I mean, because you kind of thought they were dead in the water, but they were the hottest team in the NBA at one point over a 2-month stretch this season. So you do have to give them their flowers,
Yeah, of course, man. And we'll pick things apart always, because that's the nature of talking about sports, whether it's here, writing a column, doing a radio show, sitting on your step, in the neighborhood, in the barbershop, whatever it might be. We'll pick things apart. When we also see some things that played out well, that's one of them for me. So final segment here, Keith, we'll get into a coaching matchup between Doc Rivers and Jacque Vaughn. Yes, it's early in the week, but before you know it, folks, we'll be Friday and getting ready for this game on Saturday afternoon. Jacque Vaughn, Doc Rivers, what do we expect to see? We'll break it down next right here, Locked On 76ers.
What we won't see Luka Doncic scoring a bunch of points. Man, they're about to be investigated, D. That's crazy. But you won't see him scoring a bunch of points. LeBron James, question is, will LeBron James have more than 7.5 rebounds in this playing game? Will Kevin Durant have less than 6.5 assists when they play in the playoffs? What about Steph Curry? Will he have more than 3.5 assists or 3.5 3-pointers made when they play the Sacramento Kings, right? So, prize pick, how does this work? What you do is you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go score more or less than their prize picks projections, right? There's no competing against other people. It's just you and the projections available. Prize Pick offers projections on any sport that you watch. That includes the NFL, NBA, NHL, PGA golf, basketball, the whole nine. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's fast and safe withdrawals, right? So the call to action is you download Prize Pick app or go to theprizepick.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code locked on. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you 100. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks will give you 50. Don't forget to enter the promo code locked on at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Do it today, people. Definitely do it today.
Few days away from the postseason, and we're going to have a pretty interesting matchup between the coaches. On the 76ers side, Doc Rivers, one of the top 15, Keith, I think it was, voted last year during the top 75,
Yeah.
NBA 75. Doc Rivers was voted one of the all-time coaches. Jacque Vaughn getting another opportunity as a head coach to come in and with this upstart Brooklyn Nets team. So how do you look at this matchup between these two head coaches once things get underway on Saturday?
Right now I think Jacque Vaughn has an edge. That's not anything against Doc. Like I'm not like knocking Doc, but what I mean is by the edge. And I think we discussed this a little bit yesterday. Jacque Vaughn has some new toys that the Sixers, unless they've been scouting them heavily and all this, and they probably have. But he has some new toys that the Sixers players aren't going to really know what they're going to do until they get out there and play them. But yet at the same time, he knows what it's like to play against Harden, play against Embiid, Maxey, the bench, all that, right? The only person he probably doesn't have a real good feel for is Jalen McDaniels. So I think you got to give him the edge, at least as far as at least game one of knowing what to do against this team. I think that I kind of think that Jacque Vaughn has done a tremendous job this season.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I haven't been there. I haven't seen a lot of their games, but whenever I talk to him or whenever I'm in the room for his press conferences, I'm like impressed. He pushes all the right buttons. I think that he's the type of coach. If Ben Simmons had him early in his career, Ben Simmons would be on the floor playing and he wouldn't be having these issues because that is the first coach who held Ben Simmons accountable. The first coach that held Ben Simmons accountable, right? So to me, that goes a long way. Now, Doc Rivers has better talent, more experienced talent when you talk about Tobias Harris, you talk about PJ Tucker, you talk about Joel Embiid and James Harden, right? Whereas Jock has a young team that has nothing to lose. So on a talent standpoint, I think Doc has an advantage. But I'm telling you, man, I'm really impressed with Jacque Vaughn. Very impressed by him.
Yeah, I have been too. When they made the change and they decided to give him the opportunity to take over before they took the interim tag off and they gave him the label as head coach, I was surprised because I'm like, really, Jacque Vaughn? I mean, I understand the Orlando part. I understand him being on the coaching staff as an assistant for a while. Also, I just didn't see it, and I've been pleasantly surprised. Clearly, things will be told at a much better next season when he takes over with an entire training camp, has this group, maybe some more additions to their team, some changes that will everybody makes every off season. to add to the group, we get a better sense. But what he has done this year for what they have had, the hand that was dealt, and keeping the train on the tracks instead of falling off, he's done a really good job of blending the talent and getting it to work the way that he has been able to do so. I still give the edge to Doc Rivers. I'm not looking at this one as much as I give credit to Jacque Vaughn for the things that he has done. I'm looking squarely at Doc Rivers and saying, all right, when we look at in the past and we talk about Nick Nurse, we talk about Eric Spoelstra specifically last season, even going back to he and Nate McMillan as an interim for the Hawks series at that time. We talked about certain guys that could really, and I was one that looked at Nick Nurse and was like, oh man, he scares the heck out of me going against Doc Rivers and what they do, the way the Toronto Raptors do things. Much respect to Nick Nurse, and I respect Jacque Vaughn for the job that he has done this year. He will make some good calls, I'm sure, however long this series goes along. But I look at Doc Rivers and I think that he'll have his number. The scouting, to your point, has been done throughout the season. We see scouts from other teams in the arena when we're there, and you travel. I don't, and you know that there are Sixers scouts that are out there taking a peek, especially when they have an idea of who could be their first round matchup. So it's one thing to scout them. It's another thing to go out there and execute things. And I do think that Doc Rivers and his coaching staff will do have the edge over Jacque Vaughn and the staff that they currently have. Some good guys on the bench too. Royale Ivy, former Sixer player, is also on Jacque Vaughn's staff. But I do give the edge to the Sixers staff for the experience that Doc Rivers has and the fact that he has the best player in this series that's going to help make things a lot easier for him too.
I got you.
We will find out. All right, everybody, we appreciate you checking in with us on this Tuesday. Thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. We're going to dive deeper into the series on Wednesday a little bit more. But before we do, make your second listen Locked On NBA today. We're Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Keith, can you let the good folks know where they can find us?
Sure, you can find us wherever you get your podcast, just like my man D just said. You know what I mean? Free and available. But when you go to our YouTube channel, make sure you click on the Liberty Bell. That way you become a new subscriber and you get updates whenever we release podcasts, when we post them. Secondly, make sure you do yourself a favor. And you got to follow my man D on Twitter at DivineG975. Do that now, people. Like, put this on pause and follow D. Right now. Did you do it yet? Hey, but
they did.
But tonight, listen to D on 97.5 FM. The Divine Giving Show is going to be from 10 p.m. to midnight.
Following the Flyers.
Following the Flyers.
2 games left for the Flyers, man.
Yes. There's going to be a lot to talk about that and other things. So do what you got to do. Follow my man D. Also, you can read me in the Philadelphia Inquirer, inquirer.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers.
All right. Thanks, man. Keith, as always, fun to be with you. Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Peace.